Hi everyone. I didn't get a chance to say hello to most of you because I was still busy trying to make sure that the slides weren't trash. Welcome. Thank you very much for those that contributed a pain point for today's session. One of you lucky people will take home a prize at the end of the session that Jen has kindly sourced for us from AWS, but we'll see who it is when we get to the end.
Physical or virtual?
It is physical. Would you rather virtual? Credits. Right, so AWS, the pain points. A bit of a disclaimer, I suppose, to start with, because you could read it in a certain way, right? This is not a roast. We've got to know the limitations of the tools that we're working with, and all of our tools have limitations. And the context in which they operate, this wider ecosystem of AWS tech and people and processes and techniques and all of those kind of things, architectures. So with a critical eye, we can all play a role in the evolution of that ecosystem. And today, we're doing another one of these things where we've cast the net really, really broadly. There'll be a lot of ground covered, and we won't get close to the end of what we could possibly discuss. I'm quite happy for it to take its course as we go, and I'm also quite happy as we go for you to share your experiences. You'll see there's a format that emerges here of define a pain point and what are some of the options that we've got for dealing with it. My list is by no means exhaustive, so yeah, please pipe up if if you've got something to share. That would be great. Because there were so many things to deal with, I was just looking for a way to kind of categorise them in a sense, and I chose to adopt a sort of persona model. Right, we all wear various hats when we're working in the space. And it made sense to collect some of these pain points under those personae, although I chose an unconventional one to start with. That's because not all of the responses that I got to what is your pain point were entirely serious. When they were jokes, they were usually founded in some notable thing, but they weren't all serious. So the first of those. No $69.95 month unlimited cloud plan. Also, just point of order, where somebody's contributed the idea for discussion, you'll see on the bottom of the slides, I've just dropped a note there to guilty as charged. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of is what it said. I'm sure Woodside or BHP and someone would love to have a couple of those. So we'll take that as a comment. Another quite common response that we got was like, service name. What's your pain point? This service. And I get that, because these things can be frustrating when you're trying to make them do stuff. But every service has functional limitations. That's the nature of a service. And many services have capacity limitations, not all of which are hard. We've got some scope and technique to adjust those on occasion. Sometimes they're hard. However, limitations are not the same as problems or glaring gaps. So in the course of today, we'll try and focus on those things that are glaring gaps or actual problems, as opposed to kind of inconveniences. We won't get it right the whole time. And hey, I know that's a subjective kind of call a lot of the time. When you're banging your head against a glue pipeline that won't run, or whatever it happens to be. So it seemed like a good point here just to talk about some of the strategies independent of the particular service that we might use to deal with these service limitations, the things that are causing us grief. The first of those might just be, if it's a soft capacity problem, if it's a service limit that AWS have put on your account in your region for some particular service, there's a facility for you to request an increase to that. Now, I know there's a lot of people in the room that I don't need to tell this, but we've got a really broad audience here, from beginners to seasoned crusties. So, you know, like, I'll take a few moments here and there to...
This is going to be a therapy session.
That's your bit. So yeah, you know, we can request this service limit increase. At the bottom, just go to the support centre and hit create case. Doesn't mean you'll get the service limit increase, but you know, more often than not, you probably will. Another strategy here is just to suck it up, right? Is getting around this problem more trouble than it's worth? Is your time better spent on something else? Ask yourself that question. If the answer is yes, move on. Another strategy is to wait, because AWS puts these services out in front of users as soon as possible, try and get some feedback and iteration on them. So that doesn't mean they're ready for your prime time, you know, whatever that is. Your blog has a different set of criteria than a, you know, international financial trading system. One way or the other, you know, AWS aren't going to tell you when the service is ready for you. You know, it will be released, and it will evolve over time, and it'll accrue what you need it to, or it won't, and then you'll find another way to deal with it. You can change your service or your approach. I mean, messaging, how many services for that are there? Hosting a container, how many services? A few, right? So maybe you're just not using the right one. Have a look at the alternatives. There's a workaround, which is kind of a catch-all for any particular kind of thing. But then there's this particularly important one that doesn't solve your problem, but maybe it goes some way towards doing that in the medium term, and that is raising a feature request. Because a lot of the product teams are driving their roadmap, their product roadmap, and their backlog, you know, from the demand for features. Now, organisations that are keyed into the AWS machine have channels, right? So if you're a large resources company trying to do something left of centre with a service, you really need this feature, there's a good chance you've got a bunch of people to speak to, and they're going to put, you know, little red flags on the product team's inbox, and they'll start driving it from there. But anyone can raise a feature request. There's a little link down on the bottom left of your console there. Give it a crack sometime. Alternatively, AWS partners, if you work with any of those or know any of those, AWS solution architects, account managers, all of these people tend to be pretty helpful when you say that you want to raise one of these requests. We're not going to go through this flowchart. Look at it in the slides later. The key point is there is a whole bunch of ways that you can initiate this. Not all entirely formal, but at some point, hopefully, it becomes a formal feature request. And then lastly, customising. Generally, we want to use more highly managed platform services. It removes this undifferentiated heavy lifting, makes our life a bit easier. But if your requirements are too specific, not supported, unlikely to be supported within the time frame that you need, maybe you need to compose your own service. Not for everything, but for this particular thing. And to sort of illustrate that, I'm going to borrow and adapt some slides that Adrian Cockcroft presented a couple of years ago when he came through Perth in his app modernisation talk. So he was saying, okay, what is the user need? We need this toy, an M Falcon. When we use higher order services, we can usually put one of these things together relatively quickly, but it lacks the detail. It looks roughly like what you want, but not exactly. That said, though, you can break it down and rebuild it pretty quickly. But if there is something in particular that you really need, you can optimize using those lower order services. Take that subset of the system that you need, create a new brick, whether that's crafting this function in a container or whatever it happens to be, and now you have a more specialized component that you can publish. Probably enough said on all that. Next one, elephant in the room. We'll try and get through this one relatively quickly. Should be possible because James isn't here, right? Okay, so that's. I mean that in with all due respect. Does anyone know where I'm going with this? I know some of you do. Getting mugged by NAT gateways. Paul suggested that we discuss this, right? So to run a VPC, you need subnets and route tables and internet gateways and elastic IPs and security groups and a bunch of stuff. And guess what? All of that is free. It's all free. To access any resources outside of your private subnet, though, your internal resources are going to have to route their traffic via one of these NAT gateways on a per availability zone basis. And it's hard not to say that the billing seems heavy-handed. And it just doesn't, it's not consistent with the promise of elasticity in the cloud. It is an outlier, which is why with so many of these things, go looking, it's not hard, right? If you read the fine print here, if you choose to create a NAT gateway in your VPC, you are charged for each NAT gateway hour that your gateway is provisioned and available. So it's just a machine, right? It's just a virtual machine. Data processing charges apply for each gigabyte processed through the NAT gateway, regardless of the traffic source or destination. So it's not saying routed out to the public internet, it's just if it traverses the NAT gateway. Ouch. Right? Like, I could just be talking to an AWS service, but via the sort of public endpoint. My packets never hit the public internet, but I'm going to pay per gigabyte for that traffic. Each partial NAT gateway hour consumed is billed as a full hour. Okay. And you're going to incur standard data transfer charges if the traffic does leave the region. If you no longer wish to be charged for it, you can delete it. You can't suspend it. You can't quiesce it in any way. You've got to get rid of this gateway to not be charged. It's going to cost you for the minimum version, 6 cents an hour and 6 cents per gigabyte. So what can we do about it? We can roll our own NAT instances using EC2, but now we're going to be responsible for scaling and availability and maintenance of those machines. We'll probably get the sticker cost, the per hour sticker cost down a bit, but you've got to bake the rest of that toil into the equation. You can ditch your VPC and go serverless, if you can. Because it only takes one of your resources that needs to be network addressable and in a private subnet, of course, to mean that anything else that wants to talk to it also has to be in the VPC. So that takes us down the rabbit hole. Do it if you can, seriously. Alternatively, we can use gateway endpoints. So these are cool. These don't cost anything. But there's only two kinds, the S3 and the DynamoDB kind. And what I'll do, I'll just flick forward to... So this is the scenario we're talking about now. Instance in a private subnet is trying to get to some services. It has to traverse this NAT gateway to get to the internet gateway, to get to the service endpoints. With gateway endpoints, we attach these gateway endpoints to the VPC. Our private subnet is able to talk to them direct, and these things are a direct conduit to our service. And they're free, so that's nice. It's really nice. Alternatively, we can create an interface endpoint. So these are effectively VPNs to all of the other, or most of the other AWS services. And the way they work is it's basically an elastic network interface that's VPN'd to the service endpoint. So it looks like that. The network interface is attached in your private subnet and routed directly out to the services. That'll be cheaper up until some point. I don't have a good measure of precisely where that is, but if you look at it and you go, it's about a sixth of the hourly cost. So, I don't know, if you run 6 of these things, you want to interact with 6 services, you're now up at the NAT gateway level. The data's a bit cheaper, and of course the real equation is going to depend on how much data is going across what endpoint, for instance, but that's an option for you. Has anyone else ever come across an escape pod from NAT Gateway? No?
Well, private managed. You've got the networking.
Yep.
And you've got the automation skill. It's not that hard to have a NAT system that has much benefits that you can monitor egress traffic alert on it. Do all those sorts of things. But yeah.
You've got to have that capability kind of in the organisation with the capacity to do it. Yeah. Cool. All right, so the bean counter. Let's talk about cost. Thanks, Jacob. There are no price caps. I don't know, it sort of seems outrageous. So I'm going to argue that cost, along with reliability and performance and security and operability, is a first order architectural concern in cloud solutions, right? We literally change our architectures because of the cost function of our particular workload. That's good practice. And it's curious that with any of those factors other than cost, if we perform poorly, if it performs poorly, the workload performs poorly. We expect degradation of service if we're not meeting a certain security benchmark, if our performance is suffering, right? And so it's not a stretch from that to say, well, if we're performing poorly against a set of cost metrics, we should expect degradation in our workloads. AWS isn't going to make that happen at the moment, and I don't know if there is a philosophical reason for that or a purely commercial one. I've got no insight into that whatsoever, but there's no facility for it. So there's no facility for a cost ceiling on AWS. So we can do this thing, but I think AWS people are trained to groan at this point. Is that no? You're not? Good. All right. So you can set budgets in your Cost Explorer. Go to your billing console on Cost Explorer. So heading for budgets. And you can set them on either the cost incurred, or there's a number of traffic metrics as well. So things that drive the cost. So you're able to budget based on the cost drivers, not just the charged cost at the end of the day. And once you've set one of those budgets, you can create an alert against it. So I'm creating a budget for $100 a month in this account. When it hits 80% of that budget, fire the alert. And my alert can be an email. There's a couple of things. It can be a message to an SNS queue. So you could subscribe some lambdas to the queue and have them shut down or scale your infrastructure accordingly. Feels kind of brittle, but maybe this is a break glass solution. In the event that you find too many zeros on the end of your bill, and that can happen relatively quickly. Do we have anyone who's suffered a bad case of bill shock? Ooh. Can I get some stories? Would you like to?
My story?
Sure.
One of our engineers looked at storage, which is costing us a lot. We went, there's this massive bucket of a lot of stuff that hasn't been used a long time. I know. Let's move it to Glacier and save ourselves money in the long term cost. We didn't realise, so here's just the total gigabyte budget. We went, yeah, this is all going to be really good. He didn't realise that you pay for the API calls per object. And that thing was filled with small files.
Yep. The end.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm just thinking about somebody came to, I was just saying before that I was doing a lot of consultancy in cloud, and somebody came to me and said, well, we're going to do, that typical thing of, we can't be bothered to get to the economical way of doing cloud, so we're just going to take everything and put it in IaaS, and then we'll try and reduce it from there. So they said, how much is that going to cost us? And I just spent about $150,000 building a data center, and I said, well, it's going to cost about $300,000 over the next year. And they said, well, it's not a real shock for me, but it was, so the management went, well, we can't get that past the executive, so we'll just fudge it, and we'll go to the executive with $100,000. And then after a year, it landed exactly on 300,000. I said we think. And it was just that whole thing I was looking before when, then you have to sort of start programming everything, and then you shut everything down at night, so you're swooping and saving, trying to get some costs back, and then a platform changes a particular, it's all in code, so then the particular EC2 instance or something gets changed, and so the code doesn't work anymore, so you come in the morning and half your services haven't come back up again, and all that kind of fun adventures. So I've just been asked about, haven't done that for about 3 or 4 years, but somebody came and asked me to do something like that again today. So it's all coming back.
The post trauma, yeah. That's actually a pain point that we haven't pegged for today, which is the post lift and shift realization of where you are. Did anyone else have a? Yeah.
Sometimes services are charged in multiple dimensions, and some can be easy to calculate before you set up a service, and others, we have an instance where cross-region replication on S3 backups had done some back of the envelope codes and turned out they were way off, and it was running up quite a lot more over the next month. We were going through a cost breakdown. Decided we were going to need that. So after all.
Dave, did you have one?
Oh, it was a colleague, Nat Gateway. I can't remember exactly where. It might have just been S3 that we put in the data to. We got around it with a service gateway, just rather than using the Nat Gateway, but we didn't realise at the time, or we didn't realise, and it was a root shock, a very root shock.
I had a client that was somehow busting through their Lambda allocate, the free tier, millions of invocations Lambda, which shouldn't have been the case. And month on month, they were 40-50% bill increase. Took me about 2 days. I found out what they did. So they had an image resizing Lambda, which they were, so you would hit an S3 bucket from CloudFront looking for the image that was in its file name, it had its resolution, and if it wasn't there, then 404, and that would trigger the Lambda to run, which would do a resize so that when the client came back, it would be there. But even so, there was only tens of thousands of images, not millions. Turns out that they didn't have a fav icon in their root directory. So every single request to the site was looking for a fav icon, which was running a 404, which was invoking the Lambdas, hence all that traffic. And just to make matters worse, the Lambda was in US East 1 and the bucket was in Sydney. So every time they were doing a resize, they were slurping across the globe, resizing and pushing it back across the globe for the data transfer charges. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, so what happens when you deploy a Lambda that calls itself? I was hoping these stories that, it sounds like they were shocks, perhaps not in the kind of, oh my God, the business is going under type shocks. I know they do occur, and I'm not sure there's a publicly defined process around what happens. Just appeal to AWS if that happens, right? Like, not everyone that gets a $800,000 bill pays $800,000 if there's a case for it. So there's a couple of things related around cost. So estimating and forecasting costs for new workloads. Our friend over here suggested he got it right, 300K on the dot for the year. That's nice if you can do it. There are definitely services that are difficult to profile in that respect. And I don't think there's any magic to this. It's just work, right? You've just got to model the cost. It'll be prone to error, and it's totally dependent on the depth of your level of understanding of your load profile, down to, you've got Dynamo in the scheme. It's a 4 kilobyte read. So if your object's over 4 kilobytes, well, you can count on that being 2 reads. Oh, now I need to up the provisioned IOPS, etc. Right? So you've got to know around frequency and volume and other factors. Somebody asked me today via email if this had come along in the last couple of years. Is that you, sir? All right. Thank you, Grant. Was the pricing calculator was there when you did this last time?
Yes.
Yep. So that's still there. No, presumably it's being updated with the new services and the updated costs and all that kind of stuff. But that's probably your first go-to when you're modelling the cost profile for a workload. What has changed, I think, in the last couple of years is these savings plans for compute only. So you can go into the savings plan sort of portal and you can get a price for a period and a certain fleet of machines, and it'll apply all the discounts and show you what that's looking like. But it's only for EC2, Fargate and Lambda as far as I'm aware. If you're paying for support, Trusted Advisor gives you a few tips around how to optimise cost, but that assumes your workload's already live. As does Cost Explorer, which will use past information to determine a sort of a 3-month forecast. But again, that's lagging information, and what happens this month might not be what happened last month. And probably just a final piece of advice for me is, if you are doing this profiling, focus on the big ticket items, the things that will drive higher cost. Trying to get something that is 3% of your estimate to a 90% accuracy is probably not time well spent. So there's another side to this coin, which is when your costs seem indeterminate. You might have a really good idea of what's driving the cost, but you might not be able to predict the load, for instance. So this cloud promise of elastic pricing, well, it's ostensibly better than inelastic pricing. I don't want to pay for what I don't use, but it presents a challenge in a lot of organisations. So you're talking about the accountants before, and that they wouldn't accept the 300 operating cost. So for some customers, predictability might be worth more than actual cost savings. I've had to have this discussion before. It's like, I can guarantee you on a monthly basis you'll save money, as long as you don't go over this kind of load threshold. But I can't tell you how much you'll save on a monthly basis. It's going to change. Some people find it easier to make the case to their superiors when they know it's going to be, it's a $2 million spend for the year, amortised over the next whatever, we'll pay it over the next several months, or it's counterintuitive, but it's a risk-weighted price, I suppose, is one way of looking at it. how things that we can do to maybe improve that situation. So we can try and reduce volatility through improved forecasting of our demand, but that's not an AWS thing. I don't think there's much we can do on the platform that helps us with that. That's for us to figure out. Or we can reduce volatility through observability, so getting out ahead of anomalies and spikes, for instance. Budgets can be a good tool for that, as is logging in general, and I don't think that's something that we probably want to get into today. I know observability itself can be considered a pain point. I don't know anybody that likes manually clicking through CloudWatch log groups and log streams. It's wrong. And why? There's no managed elk service yet, is there? Elastication, Kibana and Logstash? Why there isn't a managed service to collate those logs? Sorry? Yes. So a marketplace solution. Yeah. That's maybe something we can look at in the coming months as a topic.
On that list,
Sorry?
one of the things on that list, managing cost, is take a look at your main input point and look at throttling.
Yep. Yeah, good point. Yep. I'll even take a note of that.
Companies who experience that last payment will repaying, so even though they're not every year when they pay higher, smooths it out from cash flow perspective.
Savings plan.
Yeah.
That gives you discounts on committed spend, but not paying more than actual bill.
I think it is one of the inputs when you're looking at that savings plan, whether you're going to prepay or, I think.
I mean, across the whole bill,
You can do reserve things
move it to
as well. So you can do reserve things
Yeah.
for like AWS and stuff.
That's what I was going to say, like, the real, because I did that, just build one big VMware environment. So you're buying blades, doing clusters according to what you think you're going to use and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
When we went to the cloud, this uses the same thinking for reserved instances. You say, well, this is my base load. And you say, so if I can reserve that much compute, that much storage, that much memory, and I get it at 70 or 50% off, and then, if I'm an RAC or an HPF or one of those kind of things that there's a storm, 3 or 4 times a year, you're going to get this massive spike. So that platform's really good. Then you have, you budget for, instead of 5,000 a month, you budget for 7,000 a month because you have this spike in usage. And that's, that's going to come, right?
Yeah.
Or end of month financial processing or whatever it might be. But I already had the information from the on-prem VMware infrastructure, so you could see real clear patterns over 2 or 3 years.
Mm.
What's been used, and then translate that into, and then you can go kind of confidently in the cloud and say, well, using that over here, and I think that's going to be over here. And just,
Yep.
finger in the air, and you get it within the ballpark somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the target architecture looks very much like the source one, but in the cloud, and you've got an excellent load profile, then yeah.
Sort of compute structure, and then you say, well, and that's going to be a number, and then if you guys get really smart and you start using logic functions or whatever it is, app services or whatever, containers, then you're going to bring it down to pennies of what you were paying before.
Yep.
Especially all that legacy shit and stuff.
We'll move on from cost in a sec. The pricing models are complex. I don't have a solution for that, but I do have a philosophical point. I'll give it to you for free. Tip. Remind yourself of the alternative, right? I would argue that the pricing is complex but largely transparent. The rules are there. Figuring out what it means in dollars and cents terms is not always straightforward. But if you look at Azure platform, it's like there's a service and it's a bucket of features, and then if you want to use that additional feature and it's in the premium section, well, you've got to click the premium flag and take on a premium subscription, and it's 10 features. You only want the one, but you're going to pay for them all. It's just a totally different model. Whereas in the AWS world, it's, you know, if the feature has a cost, you pay the cost when you use the feature. There's something to that. But I wanted to ask the question. Is Derek here? No? Oh, I can't ask the question then. So Derek said in his comment something about the pricing model being opaque. And I wanted to have a discussion as to whether is it opaque or is it transparent but really complicated? So, like, you know, it's like the rules are there, but it's still hard to get in all circumstances to a sort of certain outcome. I don't know if anyone else has a view on that.
Well, they're published all over the place, right? It's fucking hard to understand.
Does it matter? Yeah.
The outcomes of what you need, right? Doesn't matter whether it's evil or certificates.
I suppose not. If there was a magic 8-ball that gave you the price and it was pretty accurate, you'd use that, wouldn't you? Yeah. And that's pretty opaque.
If it's sufficiently complex, you pilot or proof of concept something, trial it, and then use that as a benchmark to escalate
I was
costs.
going to say, depending on what you're building, you've also got the capability to load test it properly. Then you can run your actual thing at scale points for an hour, 3 hours, whatever it is, and then look at the build for that time and extrapolate that out. Right? Sometimes it's a really complex system with different interactions. That's the best answer because it's the real answer you're going to get. Right?
I'm going to have to.
I don't think business, like, if I remember something like that, $300,000 estimate was kind of its feel, right? You don't, it doesn't matter, right? You just kind of, it's about that much, and then you're going to use about that much, and you add on a bit of 20% flood factor, and so I don't think you ever. It's like trying to predict. It's like when you run a business, you never actually get your predictions right. If somebody wants you to get you really down to every cent, and you want to do the work like you said, I don't think you're ever get your value back in trying to break your brains on it.
As long as the volatility doesn't exceed your capacity.
About that too. Like if you're talking about line of business applications that you're using year after year after year, but if you're starting you're a startup running some amazing application that you've got no idea how many customers you can get, that's a different story. But I'm just talking about running businesses around town, running a Woodside or a REC or something like that. You know what they're going to use. Unless they want to do an analysis of their subset thing, and they need a million CPUs or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if they can necessarily know what their users are going to do. So users might be using it in a way that they didn't foresee, or uploading stuff or whatever. So, but cynically, you think that AWS makes it complex to make more money. You know. No, sorry. I'll shut up now.
Your turn is coming, my friend. Let's not worry about this one. The learner, right. So there was some big response in this area of learning. Emma Pools has made a really valuable observation. She mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago that the certifications are not accessible. So if you need a reader, for instance, if you've got a reading problem, I think we've all been to a Prometric centre and seen those like ancient hand cranked things that sit on the desk, like sorry. Yeah, Windows 3.1 is what it kind of reminds me of. But no, she's made a really good point, right? That it's terrible. If you had any kind of special requirements around accessibility, I think you're probably up the creek. So I might work with Emma to raise a feature request on that. Yeah.
So we, this is not related to that specific thing there, but we just had a guy fail an exam. He was sitting a proctored exam, and one of the cleaners walked in on him by accident, so they failed him on the spot. Yeah, so no to proctored.
Yeah. So another really common one. Yeah, they would. And I mean,
Certainly are very keen to address the accessibility that has been raised.
But
But you're right,
outsourcing a problem doesn't absolve them from responsibility, right? So.
correct. Correct. And I mean, there has been change in the provider landscape, slow, but for the exams, there used to only be one provider, didn't there? And then there was two. There was a lot of response around what I'm calling the service and feature tracking fire hose. So everyone's saying, how do I stay up to date? Like, how do I keep abreast of all of this change? I don't know. Stress about it a bit less. Do you really need to be across it all? So as an example, there are, 400 plus EC2 instance types. Do you need to know what they all do? Do you need to know how many T-shirt sizes there are in a G4M?
Just use serverless. For fuck's sake, come on, guys.
Yeah, I know. It's just, but this is an example, right? You don't probably need to know all those. You may need to know the classes. You might not if you're doing serverless. You don't even need to know that there's memory optimized and compute optimized. You just don't. So apply that. But there are some outliers, right? Occasionally there are services or features that come along that are kind of step changes on the platform. I think we've just seen one recently with IAM Anywhere. So you can subscribe to the AWS blog and every several days work through that list of all of the service announcements, which gets pretty tedious, or get someone to summarize it for you, or hone in on what it is that you do and what you need to know about. Learning overload, right. We won't say much about this because we're actually planning a session on learning and certification, and we'll have a chance to talk about a bunch of this stuff. It's been sort of in the works for most of the year, and we're hoping to get it done before the end of the year. If you have any suggestions as to what that might cover, you can raise your hand now or just message us and let us know. I think we'll try for November on that one, October, November. Let's move on. DevSecOps engineer. Who uses Control Tower? Who's never heard of Control Tower? Yep, cool. So if you've not heard, for those that haven't heard of Control Tower, in your organisation, do you have more than one AWS account? Yeah, no? If you have more than one AWS account, are they separate accounts that you log separately into? Yeah. Okay. There's a kind of maturity, organisational maturity benchmark around AWS and AWS management, where you realise that you need to use accounts as the fences to ring in risk and security. And if you're actually using the platform enough, you'll eventually reach service limits within an account that force you into another account. You want to be managing these probably from one place. It gets painful to remember a list of account numbers. It gets even more painful to remember credentials for every role, because remember, you shouldn't be logging into these accounts with your AWS administrator role every single time. So every role that you have in every account, unless you have built yourself what we call a landing zone, which is a collection of accounts with a consolidated management framework, you can improve your experience and the security of the platform by having centralised management, governance, billing, and access control. And Control Tower is the managed service that AWS give us to do this sort of out of the box, so to speak. Sean Clements, he couldn't be with us tonight, but he's supplied a fair bit of information around this. We use Control Tower to consolidate this management, and we expect to be able to automate any of the operations that occur on that. When we create a new account using Control Tower, we want it to be configured with all of our security controls, with all of the logging and auditing, with all of the inter-account sort of resource sharing that might be configured. We want the networks to be, because Control Tower will create you a VPC in a new account that you create. You may want that to access resources in another account's VPC. Theoretically, there's a way to configure Control Tower to do this, but practically there are quite a few barriers to full automation. An example that we've got here is not being able to integrate VPCs with Transit Gateway, so the service that we use to connect up our VPCs in different accounts. So that is a bit of a challenge.
Sorry, there is a solution to that. So we're using the service transit network orchestrator with customization Control Tower, which does it nicely.
Sorry, what was that?
STNO. It's another AWS solution, serverless transit network orchestrator.
Oh.
And you use that in conjunction with Control Tower, customization to Control Tower. It works nicely.
Excellent. Has anyone else had any experience getting around these barriers? No. Some of the first couple of examples that I had up there, they're hacky. But one option is actually don't use Control Tower. There are third parties that will sell you solutions where they've tried to build effectively their version of a Control Tower. Might be an option, probably not for smaller organisations. I would argue is probably a license barrier there. Part of setting up our landing zone is usually setting up a single sign-on facility, right? You just want to authenticate once to your collection of accounts. Just remember one set of credentials, and then AWS SSO, which is now called IAM Identity Center, will then offer you all of the accounts and all of the roles that you are allowed as that authenticated user to assume. When you first start using this, it's an absolute revelation. But it has no configuration API. So it kind of says that our landing zones in some respect can't be 100% automated. That's a bit of a problem. The mitigation, though, is that this is not something we do a lot. And so usually we're only doing it once for an organisation if everything we do is within the same estate, within the same the sort of collection of accounts. So there's that. This is a pain point that got me quite a few times. So no single sign-on or temporary credentials for unattended processes. So for this I mean if you are running a process without human oversight, it's a CI build. All right. When I'm in VS Code and I want to build an app, my deployment script will probably try and it'll make pretty early on. It'll make some call to an AWS API. If I'm not authenticated, because it's a single sign-on profile that I'm usually accessing it by, my machine will flip up a browser window. It goes through a bunch of screens until it gets to the bit that says, are you okay to log in? It's literally an OK button, and you press OK, and now you're logged in again. Nice. But when GitLab CI or Jenkins or whatever you're running tries to run the exact same build, the exact same container, it doesn't have a finger, it can't it can't use SSO. The immediate solution to that has been, oh well, I'm going to have to create vanilla IAM users in each of the accounts that I'm going to deploy to, and I'll need to create, and I'll need to take those credentials out and put them in my CI system or whatever the process is. And that's not a great solution, because the credentials for an IAM user are permanent. They never change. When you've got them, you've got them. So if somebody takes them off your machine, they've now got access as well. When we do our SSO access, our credentials are temporary. We're constantly refreshing them. So if they ever get lost, there's some level of protection there. An IAM Anywhere is a recent announcement which, until you lift the hood, seems like, oh yes, that problem is now resolved. And technically it is, but there's a couple of caveats to it. So what IAM Anywhere will do is allow your automated processes, anything that's unattended, to use the same temporary credentials scheme as you do when you're logging in with SSO. However, the credentials that it uses are certificates, not the session keys and access keys and things that you would otherwise get. So you basically, you register your certificate authority with AWS, you mint your own certificates, and that is the credential that allows those things outside of AWS to talk to AWS resources. And IAM sort of checks that and goes, no, the certificate was signed by that CA is for this role, that everything's good. So what it means is you need to have your own certificate authority, which I know some people in the room have probably do or have done, but that's a non-trivial task. It comes with you can do it on your laptop now, but if you lose the master certificate that you've used for that root certificate authority, all of the credentials for all of your things disappear. You won't be able to get them back. AWS has a service for that, which is cool. And it'll do what you need to make this happen. And if you are any business up and down the terrace, you're not even going to think twice about taking that up if you're going to create a separate CA just for AWS. You might actually want to reuse an existing one that you're managing. But the minute that you click the go button on, I forget what it's called, the CA service, it's a $400 bill, and every month you're going to get $400 after that. For those of us in serverless land, we've just experienced a 2 orders of magnitude increase in our in our bill. For smaller organisations or people that with serverless workloads that aren't costing a lot, that's a really big commitment. So it works, it's excellent, it's nice that it's there, but yeah, the circumstances need to be right to take it on. And then a similar point is services that don't support SSO. So even think of something like serverless framework. I don't know as of this moment, but it wasn't that long ago that serverless framework, if you use that to deploy your apps, didn't support SSO, which is kind of weird because I don't think there's an awful lot to it. Basically when you do an AWS configure in your command line interface for an IAM user, it just stores a bunch of credentials in your credentials file. When you use AWS SSO login, it uses it stores some credentials in the SSO cache something file. The services that don't support SSO are really just not looking for credentials in the right places. So it's usually okay just to copy those credentials to the credentials file and the services will work. So there's a bunch of utilities like your SSO. There's a few others. This slide isn't finished. That you can basically, the NPM packages, chuck them into your build. You've got a comment to make, Grant? No? Sorry? Yeah, you just throw them into your... It's a bit inconvenient, but you install it as part of your build dependencies. You run it before you invoke almost anything, and it will just refresh the credentials file from your SSO cache credentials file. Everything done. Just get the time check. Oh, time flies. This is a big thing, so I'm just going to pass over that because we've been there.
Too much for one day.
It is, and I knew that, but it never goes to waste. These are all the developer services.
Just getting started.
Yep.
License taken.
Hamish.
I'm not a cowboy. Well, I am. Okay.
So no, I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying this is the chance for the therapy session. Just quickly, who here is part of a AWS partner organisation? Cool. It comes with its own idiosyncrasies, right? One of those pain points. Who am I talking to this week, right? AWS is a distributed organisation. If you haven't heard about the whole two-pizza team construct and what have you, we can't go into it now, but you'll hear about it soon enough if you haven't. The whole organisation is decomposed to relatively small teams, and that doesn't matter whether you're talking about people in the US or the local team. And then when you bundle on top of that natural attrition and movements and growth, restructuring, it's really hard to navigate that organisation. It can be. And if it's not hard, well, no, it's either hard because it's hard to track or find the right person, or if you do, it's hard work to maintain it because there's no single person that you're dealing with for just about everything, right? Yes, you get a partner manager, but they're assisting and they're not really going to get stuff done for you. You do that by talking to a particular SA, a particular account manager. That's a pain point. Competing with your partner is a pain point. Have you got any observations on this, Hamish?
Hold me. No. I guess, as a partner, one of our main gripes is that we lose business to AWS, and they expect us to share all the information, and it goes one way. So,
yeah.
And they're quite happy putting professional services teams into our customers and taking work that we would normally do. So, that's I guess, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That is a conversation almost word for word that just about every partner ends up having with AWS. Probably multiple times. So you're competing to some extent, not just in your clients, but also with people. We lose some really good people to AWS periodically, and I mean that's great for them as individuals if that's what they want to do. That's fantastic, but it's hard. When you find really good people and they go to your partner, it just feels a bit difficult. Yeah, losing my team. All right, we're kind of at time. But just want to open it up. There's, as you can see, there's a crap load of other stuff that we could have talked about tonight. If anyone's interested, we can come back and do some of that, maybe in a shorter format. Right, okay. Maybe that's the kind of thing we can slip in as a bit of a 5 or 10 minute kind of session on some of these things over the course of the coming weeks. But has anyone got anything that they wanted to share or contribute on the back of the session?
I did a quick poll of my team before this, and the number one complaint with them was CloudFormation errors. So not surfacing the actual error and wasting hours, if not multi-hours, like actually trying to find out what the error is. And because we work with CloudFormation a lot, that's a very common thing. And so something that could be actually rectified quite, not easily, but in a better way. So.
Yeah, Dave also, he'd mentioned that. So one of the slides that we flipped over was on that point. Yeah, so that's good to hear. Yeah, well, it's not good to hear, but
It's not panacea.
mm. So did anyone else have anything that they wanted to share? No? All right. So we have a prize today. It's a shoebox containing an Echo Dot and various AWS paraphernalia. The way that I ran this one this week, I just want to say anyone that contributed a pain point sort of gone into the hat, and I've drawn some random names from that. First being Darcy, who is not here. Just lucky I drew a second. I'm pretty sure Rob's not here as well, otherwise I'd be seeing him right now. Zainab?
Zainab's not here, but I can take it for her and give it to her. I promise.
I know, and I knew that this might come up, but I really wanted it to make it with someone here. Sheldon. Thanks, mate. But thanks everyone for your contributions. If you want to see anything, if you want to see a drill down or something else, just let us know via the usual channels. September is a bit of a problem. There is a lot of stuff packed into September with convention kind of conference season kicking off. There's a bunch of events both in Perth and out of Perth that are taking people away. There's school holidays. We juggled for a while and ended up deciding it was actually just a bit hard to fit something in. So we're going to take a bye in September. So it'll be the first month this year that we haven't actually had a session. We looked at options for squeezing in 2 in 1 month, and it's not out of the realms of possibility, but we'll focus on trying to get back in October. One of the upcoming events is around learning and certification. So if there's anything particular you want to hear around that, again, please send through your feedback and suggestions. We may be having another one on IoT.
Maybe the CMD guys.
The what, sorry?
No, I'll talk about it afterwards. Maybe CMD, yeah. And IoT as well.
And IoT. And we will try and get in another networking session before the end of the year. The last one we had at the stables was pretty well attended and I think enjoyed by all. So we'll see if we can get something else like that set up and pack it in before Christmas. Everything from you, Jen?
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.